Welcome back to Conversations for the Good. Good morning, Dr. Jane.
Good morning, Anna. How are you?
I'm doing well. How about yourself?
I'm just fine. It's great to be together.
Yes, it is, Dr. Jane. We talked about family and relationships in one of our earliest conversations. Our discussion was specific to dealing with the difficult demands of the pandemic. And I was wondering if we could turn toward the quality of the relationships and how we are faring in difficult times and out of difficult times.
Well, sure, Anna. Life is teeming with relationships. In a very general sense, everything is a relationship. Our connection to people, places, things, our connections can be in the form of preferences, likes, dislikes. All are based on direct experience and also, the conditioning that we've talked about, the beliefs, the backstory. Our interpersonal connections, though, and interpersonal relationships, are specific to connections with people. And this is an innate need. Our need for human connection it's really part of our hard wiring. So it starts to develop actually in utero. And our ability to make connections with other people, interpersonal connections, begins in the first 4 years of life. Very often this is referred to as the holding environment. And this is a period of a time when we're really engaging with our caregivers early on. And as I say, first 4 years of life. So these are the people that provided food, warmth, stimulation, protection, social contact. And all of these are conditioned patterns. All these things that happen to us and how they happen to us in those first 4 years of life are really etched in our neural system. And much of it is pre-verbal. So this means that we really don't have necessarily images or memories or concepts that help us understand what happened during those first 4 years.
So what you're saying is that we're wired for relationships, and our first 4 years starts the process of how we connect with others. And some of our experiences is in our wiring, yet we may not be able to put a memory or a reason with it. So
that's right, Anna. That's exactly right.
So some of the things we say, do, or want may be a complete mystery to us.
Well, yes. And our sense of who we are in connection with others, is being formed in those years. So the family system that we oriented in, regardless of what it was comprised of, I mean, sometimes it's biological relations, but not necessarily. This really sets the stage for our ongoing conditioning and also our ongoing development. So the system provided things like beliefs, values, and provided these through instructions and also modeling. So we were having, and then this is part of our backstory, beliefs and values, which are those collection of guiding principles that eventually dictate how we see ourselves and how we see the world and how this gets expressed through our actions. And we either experience firsthand what it felt like to be safe and protected and comfortable and connected in those early years or not. And this data, as I say, is stored in the neural system. So it's all there. It's all been downloaded.
So the groundwork is laid early in life, which is great if you happen to be born in a healthy family system. But if that's not the case, your foundation is in trouble. Can we talk more about how that plays out?
Sure. And I want to say, first of all, it's not always doom and gloom. There's a level of dysfunction even in relatively healthy families. And in unhealthy households, the dysfunction can run from, mild to severe, kind of on a continuum. And we often find ways to compensate for the family deficits, like turning to others outside of the family. It might have been that we were maybe inadvertently, not even realizing that we were looking for other ways to operate in the world, but kind of stumble on it by having experiences with other people. And they offer maybe different modes of behavior or different guidance as to how to live life. And these could be people who were in our extended family, grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, or they could be neighbors, school teachers, school chums. Um, and what they provide is really an alternative to what we've been learning at home.
So there's no need to lose all hope, right?
Well, no. And in fact, most of us are aware of our family's dysfunction, at least in part, and very often speak of it openly. The hitch is that it's often so much more obvious to see dysfunction in others or to kind of project the blame onto others. And what we have then are blind spots to our own deficits or how our backstory is contributing to our intentions or our motivations. And as I say, it's learned early on. It's really that early conditioning, and some of it is not available to us. I mean, we really might not understand the early program, but it's there in our neural makeup. So we may disagree with certain modes of behavior in the family. And we've all said to ourselves and to others, I'll never do that. And yet, isn't it interesting how so often we wind up reenacting the family dynamics, in our social emotional relationships, in our work environment, and remain oblivious to how we're contributing to these relationship issues and also the failures that we may be experiencing in relationships. So it's not enough to say, I'll never do that. We have to discover really, what are the clues? Find the clues as to what we're doing, and also look at what we will do instead of the behavior that was modeled. This requires insight into ourselves, and then acting on that insight in order to make the changes necessary. Insight is a beautiful thing, but it doesn't mean diddly unless we use it. And here again, we're talking about conscious choice.
Yes, it sounds like another path that requires self-discovery. We've been here before in all our conversations, it seems like.
Well, that's right, Anna. It's about turning toward the issues, turning toward the discomfort. And it's easy to either, I should say it's easier often, to either ignore the relationship issues or project the problems onto others. We all do it. Or we may opt to accommodate or enable deficits, both ours and those of others. So this also paves the path to unhealthy interpersonal connections. So this can be avoided. We've talked a lot about the ongoing practice of self-awareness, and this is really where we need to land once again. Self-awareness directed toward knowing ourselves, admitting our shortcomings, and making committed conscious choice to really change the undesirable behavior. But it requires the awareness. That's the foundation. And I found that really healthy relationships are grounded in two primary relationships. Both need to be solid and in order. And first is the relationship to ourselves, knowing ourselves. This can also include acknowledging that there's a part of myself that's a best or higher part. And the second relationship is a relationship to a power greater than ourselves, however we choose to define that. And these need to be solid and anchored because this lays the groundwork, the very foundation for relationships that really offer safety and security, support, and comfort.
Dr. Jane, can you provide a little more insight about what these two relationships hold for us?
Well, sure. Our relationship with self is really the only route to challenging the conditioning, that we learned in our families and our early experiences. Using awareness, we are able to own our thoughts and our feelings, our behaviors, and discern between healthy needs and really kind of unhealthy neediness. We need connection with our best and higher self in order to do the next right thing. So being able to acknowledge that I have that capacity is really essential. And a power greater than ourselves can sometimes be, for some people, that higher part of themselves. That's perfectly okay. For other people, there tends to be more of a spiritual connection in life that guides them and empowers them to live a life committed to a code of honor and integrity, which also is a guide to that next right thing. Each of us must discover for ourselves what this is for me, and then trust it and follow it.
Well, can you explain a little bit more about the needs and neediness?
Sure, Anna. Needs are normal, healthy, valid parts of who we are. There was a fellow back in, he started writing his theories in the 40s, published a book in 1954, Abraham Maslow, who talked about a hierarchy of needs, talked about how in our development as humans, our psychological development really required that we have certain physiological needs met first, biological needs and safety needs, before we can really develop needs that allow us to have healthy attachments and healthy connections with people, and also self-esteem, and eventually maximize our potential as humans. And so this is about that environment that is offered to us early in life, and whether or not the environment offered security and caring and support, and our awareness of our needs and the healthy part of our needs really allows us to survive and thrive, as we've talked about before, by taking responsible action. So life is kept on an even keel because we're able to access our own creative power and our own resourcefulness to recognize these needs and meet these needs. So that's very healthy. There's another component, though, that can be unhealthy, and that is our neediness. And very often, this is where we're operating out of deficits or a position of desperation or helplessness, that kind of self-belief that I can't do it, or that's other people get to do that, but I can't. And it's always looking for external solutions to really solve the problem. So this really develops what we call a victim mentality. It becomes part of our personal view. So this forms what we can refer to as attachments, really unhealthy attachments, which are how we hold other people, situations, things responsible for feeling fulfilled, feeling safe, feeling secure. It's like, I can't do it myself. I have to have other people do it for me. And these attachment patterns, again, they start in those first 4 years of life and evolve over a lifetime through our teenage years and our adulthood. And they can cause a great deal of psychological imbalance and ambivalence. So we might wind up having a fear of inadequacy and being in constant conflict about not being okay. So it really becomes the kind of the foundation for how we live life, how we view ourselves, how we view the world. And when we're trying to allay these fears that come out of the neediness, it's always sought outside ourselves. So the comfort is sought through sometimes unhealthy attachments, whether the attachments be to our families, relationships, friendships, romantic relationships. We expect other people to take away the discomfort, sometimes regardless of what anyone else needs or wants. I mean, it really becomes paramount. And then there's the other end of the spectrum that might indicate the fear of any kind of attachment. So this is more, it appears more as avoidant behavior, not wanting to get too close, kind of pushing people away from us and maintaining emotional distance and a lot of ambivalence about how close can we get to others. And so social withdrawal and isolation very often is the path of comfort. It feels better to be at a distance from others.
And that sounds like it could get very lonely.
Well, yes, and unfortunately, it's perpetuated by the multiple ways that we compensate for our feelings of inadequacy. Like sometimes we become over controlling or people pleasing, or certainly codependent tendencies come out of this kind of unhealthy attachments, a fear of intimacy, and as I mentioned, the avoidant behavior. Even the psychological aspects of addictions can't be grounded in this sense of having our feelings and experiences of emptiness not being addressed, or being addressed only through, trying to get what we need from others, or other things, and particularly in addictions, this is often experienced as this almost insatiable hunger to fill the sense of emptiness and the feelings of not being enough with food, alcohol, drugs, other relationships, video games, gambling, goes on and on. The list just goes on and on. Looking outside of ourselves.
So if we don't see how we're contributing to our own unhappiness, it continues to be part of our lives and discontentment.
Well, that's right. And another dimension, as I just mentioned, is having this underdeveloped sense of emotional intimacy. This capacity for emotional intimacy really begins again in those first 4 years of life. And it's really starts with intimacy with ourselves, knowing ourselves. It's about being able to have a sense of who I am. And it's in those first 4 years of life, the developmental piece is that I was seen and I was heard. And this fosters feelings of safety and security. So if as we develop, we're solely seeking to have our esteem needs met from others, we really never explore who we are. We really can't really cultivate this emotional intimacy with ourselves. We don't know what we really want. We don't know what we really need. And we don't understand that finding this and operating from it is an inside job. So the result is a life of ongoing desperation to find somebody or something to help us feel whole.
Well, Dr. Jane, let's talk about healthy relationships. What are the key elements?
Well, there are many, Anna. There's quite a laundry list. I mean, first we really need to cultivate trust, that confidence that someone has our back, whether it's a best friend or it's our partner. And then there's also that loyalty of being faithful, being good as our word, always considering others in our decision making and in our commitments, that we really follow through. Respect is also important. Listening, being open to others' perspectives, and it's a tough one, especially when those differ from ours. To really respect other people's opinions and their choices, and also patience is a key element. We're all works in progress, and so we make mistakes. The key is, let's make new mistakes. Communication is also an important piece. It needs to be two-way. So active listening has to be part of it. And sometimes it's important that we allow ourselves to really listen and not respond. Sometimes when someone else is talking, we're already formulating what we're going to say. And active listening is really allowing myself to take in what the other person says. Also, honesty is a key to healthy relationships. But I always like to think of being able to tell the truth with compassion, because truth without compassion has sharp edges and can really be hurtful and harmful. And in healthy relationships, we also have shared interests. There's usually some common ground, and yet we also have to have boundaries, and these are defined by who we are and who we're not. And we have to be clear on those. So it might include my physical space or my body or my opinions. It's important that I know what my boundaries are so that I can be clear in communicating them. And then there are two more that I think are really important that we very often don't think about as being key elements in relationships. One is self-discipline. I need to be responsible for my own mind-body wholeness and health. And if I'm not taking care of myself, it's going to affect the other people that I know and love. And the other piece is self-improvement. We always need to be looking to how we can be our best selves. We are meant to evolve. And it's so important that we're actively involved in that evolution.
Dr. Jean, what about conflicts in relationships? This has been a year of conflicts, just escalating conflicts.
Well, truly, and a brief but broad brushstroke is that the pandemic has been, as we've explored before in earlier conversations, the perfect storm for fear and anxiety. which sets us up to be in survival and not necessarily at our best. We've had the lockdowns and the sheltering and increased together time for some and also forced separation for others. So all have contributed to difficulty in coping and also increased conflict. Traditionally, breakups, and I find this so interesting, usually happen in relationships after people have spent an extended time together. It's like there's like too much togetherness can sometimes push toward that choice of, we need to split. We can't do this anymore. The fact that we've been spending more time together doesn't necessarily mean that it's been quality time. And certainly this has played out in the pandemic. So it hasn't necessarily been quality time. Household tasks, childcare tasks haven't necessarily been equally distributed. And people, even though they've been spending more time together, haven't necessarily felt seen or heard through the pandemic. So, this really kind of highlights that relationships inside and outside, the family system have really taken a hit because of the social distancing. And also sometimes because of the really strong differences and opinions regarding safety issues, how things need to be played out for safety.
What are some things to keep in mind regarding our relationships as we move through these difficult times?
Well, exploring ourselves is paramount. We really need to know what's going on from the inside out. We can't change others, but we can change ourselves. And healthy relationships require effort and commitment. They don't just happen. And it begins with, that's exploring ourselves, begins as an inside job. So it's important that we discover, what makes us tick and who we are, what we need, what we want, and to be curious how this plays out in our relationships through how we communicate and the actions that we take. It's also important to avoid judgment and criticism, particularly of others' behavior, especially when we're trying to negotiate for some kind of a change. And when we stick to the behavior, it really can salvage that I love you or I appreciate you as a person, and the behavior, is something that I want to focus on. And it can be enormously helpful. Using I statements rather than you. You is always pointing the finger. And so really kind of coming back and taking responsibility to convey what I need clearly, own my own reactivity. And when things start to escalate, it's time to take a time out. We've talked about that in the past, the chill time. And using active listening. Sometimes it's really important that when someone is telling me something, that rather than trying to respond immediately, I reflect back what I just heard so that we can be really very clear before we respond. The other piece is mind reading. Avoid it at all costs. It doesn't matter how long we've lived with someone. It's important not to assume. Always check out for accuracy and work for win-win solutions. That can be so incredibly important. How can we both feel good as we find a solution? And above all, it really is living with gratitude and compassion in our relationships. That thankfulness goes a long way. And as we've talked about, it really has such an incredible impact on our body-mind experience. It really does.
Well, and I'm so grateful for you and these conversations, Dr. Jane. There's so much to think about here. So this all hits so close to home for, I think, many of us. As always, so much great advice. Thank you, Dr. Jane.
Thank you, Anna.
Until our next conversation.